And I had a conversation with him, a drink with him, long after this. And if you remember, when he finished his investigation, he turned all this stuff over to the House. And members on the House who hated Clinton couldn't wait to release this stuff in the public.
Oh, well, it was.
And Ken Starr actually said to me that he was surprised that happened. That he thought they would be more discreet in what they released.
Are you serious?
Yes, I raised my right hand.
What did you say
now,
to
that
him?
Shows
what did you say to him when he said that to you?
Well, I looked like, I don't remember.
Your jaw hit the floor?
Said. My jaw hit the floor. I mean, but it didn't surprise me. But that showed his naivete. You know, the only reason I mentioned, I've been in the street. I've worked myself up from representing those kinds of people. Ken Starr has had this charmed life. You know, Court of Appeals. You know, anybody who goes to work, you know, every day wearing a morning coat, that tells you they're not in touch with what's really going. And that's what he wears in the Supreme Court. So he, you know, the guy who was in there before him, Bob Fisk, would have been a much, you know, who was in for a while, and they got rid of him on some stupid technicality.
Yeah.
But he'd been around. He'd been U.S. attorney. He'd been. Can I tell one funny story?
Of course you can.
Or am I getting in the way of your questions here?
You're my guest.
Because I want you to hear one funny story.
We're just sitting on a couple of bar stools talking.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
There is one very cute funny story I got to tell you about representing Clinton. It was an unusual case because of the subject matter. I would talk to him all the time, and I would get to see him whenever I wanted to see him, and aides were not present. So I'm out with my wonderful wife, Ellen, one night, and it's about 11 or 11:30, and the White House calls me. He says, the president wants to see you, and given the hour, you've got to come in this extra special entrance. So I drop Ellen off at home. I drive to the White House. It's probably 11:45, and I pull in right behind the residence. Mm-hmm. And they call them stewards, but, you know, they got small nuclear arms
under
their jackets. Comes down and he looks at me and he says, Mr. Bennett? I said, yeah. He says, you're from New York, aren't you? And I looked at him, and you know, I can say this about myself. He was a big, beefy Irishman.
Right.
And I went to school with all these people.
But you didn't recognize him from class.
And I didn't recognize him, but I'm looking, you know, is this Maloney or O'Reilly? Is this? I said, yeah, how do you know? Do we know each other? He says, oh, no. He says, the only people who come in that entrance and park their car here and lock it are from New York. And, I mean, that's one of my favorite stories.
Another story that has a case that you handled that has now, I think, passed into history, and I'd love to have you tell us, if you could quickly, what it was about, is the Valerie Plame affair. You know, to this day, I reread it, and it's still, I still feel my brain going in knots to try to figure out what in the hell that was really about.
Well, what I represented, I
represented Valerie, you represented Judith Miller.
I represented the reporter, Judy Miller. And what happened in the case was that Bob Novak wrote a column. Right. He's the Chicago Sun-Times, I think it is, reporter, mentioning that she was, I forget the word, CIA operative or something like that. Operative. And that just...
It blew up.
It blew up, and the intelligence community went crazy.
But think how much it consumed this town. I mean, was it worthy of all the column inches and airtime and book contracts and court time and lawyer fees that it ended up being about?
No, you know, I don't think it was, but you've got to remember, this is a strange town.
We take our scandals and turn them into tsunamis.
If something wrong happens, the operating premise is there's a conspiracy. You know, Sigmund Freud is given credit, although I'm not sure he said it, that sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. That is a lesson Washington has never learned. No. And it's a combination of the media, and I'm a big supporter of the media, but it's sexy stuff, and then it snowballs in Congress and journalists and.
Well, it's happening to some. Not that what's happening with the economy isn't legitimate, but I'm sure that there's an awful lot of cable news reporters are learning more about the global markets than they ever knew.
Yeah.
But you know what?
But you know, having said what I just said,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's another side. If somebody knowingly and intentionally outs a CIA agent, I think they should be prosecuted to the hilt. I mean, I really do. And
but in the end, was it just Novak who did that? I mean, who was guilty? Was it just Scooter Libby? Was it just?
well, we'll never know.
We'll never know.
We'll
So
never know.
That's the bottom line. We'll never.
The bottom
ever
line
know.
is we'll never know if Libby was put up to this, and whether he really did out. You know.
Did you agree with the president's pardon of Libby?
I don't know if I agree or don't agree with it. I don't really have. I'm not ducking you. I don't really have an opinion of it. I mean,
It's not a surprise that he did that.
well, he didn't actually pardon him yet. He
Okay.
gave him clemency, which
Clemency,
meant.
okay.
Well,
All
the
right.
difference is simply that
Yeah.
he didn't have to
No,
go to
it's
jail.
I like you
But
making
my
the
guess is
distinction.
he probably will get a pardon before
The 11th hour of the last day when all those
Yeah.
those things happen. Before we run out of time, you know, we've talked about all, you know, you've had so many high-profile cases, but a case that I thought was so interesting and is probably not on many people's radar was the handling of the Zapruder film.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those iconic pieces of our history. It's sort of like Marilyn Monroe's memorabilia, you know, it's just there, but you don't know who owns it or where it is and in what form it is. But it actually, I don't know how many years ago, but the family actually still owned it, right?
That's correct.
And we're going to sell it to the federal government.
Well,
and you
they owned
handled
it. They owned it, and then an act was passed, the John F. Kennedy assassination. You know, I could have a word off there.
Right.
And that said they should gather all of the information about the Kennedy
What year was this?
assassination. I was afraid you were going to.
Well, just
In
10
the 70s.
years ago? Okay.
Oh, no. And remember, there was this film.
Right. That's when it all
And
started
it
with
is
the film that
most
the old man
accurate
shot.
film, Mr. Zapruder
Right.
Sr.
And you watched it many times as a young man.
We all saw it. And then many years, well, the film was taken back in the 70s.
And didn't Time Life own it for a while?
Time Life owned it for a while, but then they decided they had so many requests to use it or not
Too hard
use
to
it. It was
handle.
a hassle.
Right.
They sold it back to the family.